Now this teaching is funny. I did this at the Monday night Bible study. I was thinking, well, we just happened to be there. I didn't jump there because we're going through the book of Luke. And we had the Luke chapter 2. I thought, well, it's Christmas. It's the nativity scene. Okay? So why not do that, right? And that's what I'm going to do because it's the real nativity scene. What really happened there. So Luke chapter 2, verse 1. So let's start off with the timing, okay? At the time of Jesus' first coming, they had high expectations of the Messiah appearing. Believe it or not. Isn't it funny? Right now, just before his second coming, we have high expectations, don't we? Of the Messiah's coming again. Same thing. That's kind of interesting. And in Galatians 4:4, it says, but when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his son, born of a woman under the law. So there was a certain fullness of time and circumstances that had to happen before Jesus came for the first time. And I'm telling you, there's going to be a fullness of time before his second appearance, the rapture. Let's go to talk about, real quickly, the fullness of time, Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, right? Verse 24 gives you the whole scope of the prophecy. 77s are determined for your people and your holy city. Who's he talking to, Daniel? Yes. Daniel's obviously a Jew. He's talking about the Jews. What's his holy city? Jerusalem. So 77s are determined for Israel. And the funny thing is, the church is not included in that. Okay? So, verse 24 is the scope, right? And what is it? 77s, or 70 weeks, or 70 heptads. Then you go to verse 925, and you cover what? The first 69 weeks, right? From the going forth of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the coming of Messiah the King will be 62 and 7 weeks. When did that happen? Oh gosh, well, Zechariah 9:9 tells us when. 9:9. Because, rejoice so greatly, daughter of Jerusalem, right? Because your king's going to come to you lowly and humble, mounted on a donkey. Now remember, people always make the mistake and say, well, he was on a very humble animal, a donkey. No, that's not what it was. Donkeys were animals for who? Kings. In other words, in spite of being on a kingly animal, he was humble and lowly. See, that was the mystery of it. Okay? Then, in verse 26, what do you have? The church gap. Because after the 69 weeks, Messiah would be cut off, karat. Executed is what the word means. Was he executed after he rode into Jerusalem? Yeah. Okay, and it talks about the 70 AD destruction. Okay, so there's the church gap. So the church appears in it, but not in that 490 years. God stopped the time clock. Okay, now let's go to verse 27. And how many weeks are we missing so far? 490. Okay, 70 times 7, that's 490 years, right? And that's 77, first 69. So you're missing 1 week. 1 week. And that, what do we call that last week? Tribulation period. So just by knowing that prophecy, you should have known the coming of the Messiah. It's right there, right? If you'd known it. In fact, would Jesus possibly hold the Jews responsible for knowing that? In fact, I know for a fact he would. Here's why. Luke 19:41 through 44. Yes, exactly. It's a good thing he doesn't hold us responsible for knowing the scripture. I'm glad for that. Okay, that's sarcasm. It says this. And when he, that's Jesus, approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if he had known in this day. It's a particular day. Remember Psalms? This is the day that the Lord has made? Yeah, that's any day, right? If you put it in the context of the Psalms, it's what we call Palm Sunday. It's one particular day. I mean, we apply it to every day. This is, and it can be. Yeah, I want to rejoice in every day because it's the day that the Lord's made. But in the Psalms, where we talk about it, that's actually the day he rode into Jerusalem. So he said, if you had known in this day even the things which make for peace, but they have been hidden from your eyes. For the days would come upon you when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you and surround you and hem you in on every side. What's that? The 70 AD destruction, right? Verse 44. And they will level you to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another. That's in the temple. Okay? Because she did not recognize the time of your visitation. In other words, God expected them to be there, ready, and waiting on that particular day. Because if you calculated from the time going forth of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem and count up exactly 69 times 70 years, you would have come to that exact day. Okay? So it was the fullness of time. Plus, does God work in 2,000-year increments? Okay? So from Adam to who? Adam to Abraham is how many years? 2,000 years. Okay, interesting. And from Abraham to Yeshua is how many years? 2,000. Okay? So they recognize that God works in very exacting patterns. Oh, by the way, from Yeshua, let's extend that out just as a joke. Yeah, Yeshua to the setting up the millennial kingdom or to second return is what? 2,000 years. I wonder if he keeps that pattern. Maybe. We'll see. Well, I actually know he will. It's not the rapture could happen today or in 100 years from now. I think God's more exacting than that. Okay? So anyways, and in fact, he gave extra biblical knowledge to two people because 8 days after Jesus is born, and they bring him into the temple. Who knew about him being there? Simeon, Anna. They were both. Simeon was told by God, you're not going to die until you see me Mashiach. And guess what? He saw him. Now he says, okay, I'm ready to depart now. And Anna, who was like in the temple day and night fasting, okay, for decades, she recognized it right away too. And so those were two people totally given over to God. And I wonder if the mockers who are just following after their own lust, that's why we get that, because they're not maybe following God as fervently as they should. They're not basing their life upon it. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket, which is okay if it's God and what his word says, okay? Now, let's go into Luke 1. And let's kind of break that apart a little bit. Then we're going to find out there's no room at the inn. You know, what does that mean? They were put in a manger. And where was the stable that they lived in? Right? Or that they had to have Jesus born. And now in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken of all the inhabited earth. All right? Now he was doing that for taxation purposes. And you had to go back to your own hometown. All right? And it was the 750th anniversary of the Roman Empire in that year, which is funny enough. Which is another funny thing. It was the 75th anniversary of Israel becoming a nation. Just remember earlier this year. So yeah, it's kind of freaky when all those things add up like this. Okay, this was the first census taken by Quirinius, was governor of Syria, and all the people went in the way to register, each to his own hometown. Now, to the Jews, is taking a census a good thing? Remembering King David took a census? And it said Satan, he was moved by Satan. Okay. And then a great plague came upon them. So ever since then, they would never number in Israel. In fact, I don't know if this is dated or not, but Missler used to always say that when they count in Israel, like, let's count off. See who's on whose team. Vicky would go, I'm not one. Phil would say, I'm not two. Steve would say, I'm not three. Yeah, there you go. And so you're technically not counting because you're not that number. There's a remnant here. What year is Jesus going to return? The year of Jubilee. Okay, very good. And everybody went back to his own hometown. That's what you were told to do during the Jubilee. And that's in Leviticus 25:10. Okay, each of you shall return to his own property, and you shall return each to his own family. So right there's a little typology. When Jesus was being born, it was a type of year of Jubilee. Now, Joseph went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth. All right. Now that's like a dirty industrial town. You wouldn't think, you know what I'm saying? Somebody important was from there. To Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register along with Mary or Miriam, who was betrothed to him and was pregnant. All right, let's go over those. Now, Jesus was born in what town? Bethlehem. And what does Bethlehem mean? A house of bread. So the bread that came down out of heaven was born in the house of bread, right? And what did they do in Bethlehem? They not just raised sheep, they raised the Passover lambs in Bethlehem. Get that? So the lamb that takes away the sin of the world, the Passover lamb, was born where they raised the sheep. And what kind of shepherds came to see him? The Passover lamb shepherds. The Passover lamb shepherds came to see him and, in a sense, inspect him. Okay? Now, remember the Jews, when they saw the two different scriptures, and I thought of this, I don't know, and I'm sure other people in this connection, they were looking, a lot of them concluded there were two comings of the Messiah. One was called, anybody remember? They called him Mashiach ben Yosef, Messiah, son of Joseph. Remember Joseph of the 12 sons of Jacob, who went down and suffered? Great suffering. So they said, well, all the suffering stuff about the Messiah, he'd be the son of Joseph. And then they had a second one, which was Mashiach ben David, which is the Messiah that comes back and conquers, right? Ironically, yes. Ironically, get this. When he came the first time, he was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, right? He wasn't the conquering king. Even though he was born king of the Jews. He just wasn't the conquering king. And he was Yeshua ben Yosef. As in Mashiach ben Yosef. That's what people knew him as. So he actually came the first time as ben Yosef, the son of Joseph. So you see what I'm trying to say? There's a little type and analogy there, which I kind of found really interesting. Okay, now let's look at their genealogies. It says that Joseph was of the house and family of David. There's two different things there. The house of David was what? And then it was Judah. Because David was from Judah. The family of David means he was in the exact royal line descendant from David. You see the difference? Okay. So there's a little bit of a difference, which puts Jesus, even though Joseph was not technically in that line, it kept anyone from questioning it. You guys know about the curse of Jeconiah? Okay. The curse of Jeconiah. Now here's what happened. Okay, in Jeremiah, 22:30, right in the kingly line of David, there is a character, all right? He is known, and I'll write it out here, Lisa. Jeconiah. And in fact, sometimes in the Old Testament, God calls him Coniah. You know why? No. He took his name, Jehovah, off of the first part of his name. He says, I don't even want my name with you. So sometimes you see him referred to as Coniah. Okay? It says this, thus says of the Lord, write this man, Jeconiah, down childless, a man who will not prosper in his days. For no man of his descendants will prosper sitting on the throne of David or ruling again in Judea. He cursed the bloodline. Nobody coming from this guy is going to sit on the throne and prosper. When we have Joseph's genealogy, and that appears in Matthew 1 through 17, okay, this happens. That is Joseph's. Now, is Joseph in the bloodline of Jesus? No. I'm sorry? Yeah. So, exactly. So technically, was that bloodline curse passed down to Jesus? No, because Joseph was an Israel father. Yeah. So he bypassed it that way. But you might say, what about Mary, right? Well, here we go. Mary's genealogy is actually in Luke chapter 3, verse 23 through 38. Okay? Now, in Luke 3:31, okay? So now, here it is. Joseph goes from David to his son Solomon, and it goes down to Jeconiah. Okay, got that? And that's the cursed bloodline. Right there. What Luke does in Luke 3:31 is this. He goes through David. You have to go through David. You have to go through David. But guess what? He doesn't go through Solomon. Okay? So the other bloodline, which goes through Solomon, he doesn't go that way. What does he do? He goes through another son, Nathan. So it doesn't pass through Jeconiah. And was Mary the birth mother? Yeah. Yes. Does she have a blood curse? No. So he got around his own blood curse. Okay? Little things that, people have picked up through the years. Little technical things. Oh, by the way, if someone's claiming to be the Messiah, can they prove it through their bloodline? Today. Well, all the temple records were there to 70 AD. And you could trace it to 70 AD. And what happened in 70 AD? The Romans come in and destroy everything. So now you can't trace that someone's directly a descendant of David. Now, Mary, who was betrothed to Joseph. Now, there's three things. Okay, well, for one thing, back then, the husband could represent the whole family. Why did he take Mary? She's pregnant. She's about to give birth. Takes her on a long, dangerous, bumpy ride on a donkey to go to Bethlehem. Why did he take Mary? Because she was pregnant and she hadn't been consummating her marriage with her husband yet. In other words, she could have been stoned. He was protecting her. Okay? So it says Joseph was a good and righteous man, which he was. There's three different things: engagement, betrothed, and coming together. Three different things. Now, you could have been engaged when you were like 1 year old by your parents. Yeah. Hey, I got a cute little boy here. You got a cute little girl there. Let's put them together. Now, that wasn't binding necessarily, and that could be broken. That was engagement. Now, when the husband came and made the official offer to the bride, which she could what? Did she have to take it? No, she could refuse. When we're offered to be the bride of Christ, can we refuse? Yeah. It has to be a willing decision on our part, right? Okay, so once the betrothment starts, that's when usually the groomsman goes off for about a year to his father's house and builds on an addition, right? Then comes back for the bride. Now, coming together is actually consummating the marriage, okay? And the betrothment was so strong at that point, even though you hadn't come together, it required a divorce to break that one, okay? It required a divorce. That's how strong it was. You couldn't just say, okay, no, I changed my mind. I like this guy better or whatever. Couldn't do it. Sheep will only mate one time of the year. Believe it or not. It has to do with in the fall, something with their hormones, because of all the stuff going on. So you just go from Passover, go back 5 months, that's when they're mating. Because it's about a 5-month gestation period. So at Passover, the lambs are born. And now here's a funny verse. It could be, in fact, I'm going to make it a little deeper here. Exodus 12:5. Okay? It says this, your lamb, talking about the Passover lamb, your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. 1 year old. So that means if they were born on Passover, when were they sacrificed? Passover, if you look at it very literally, right? Born on Passover, you're sacrificed on Passover, you're exactly 1 year old. When was Jesus crucified? Passover. When was he born? Passover. I'm thinking, yeah. So you have Passover shepherds. He was born where they raised Passover sheep, lambs. Passover shepherds come in and inspect him. Okay? I mean, you see how it fits together? To me, it's just a no-brainer. Okay? To me. So it really, and I'm sure there's a lot more involved in it than this that we can make. But like I say, when we get to heaven, there's only about, I don't know, a few trillion things we'll start off with that will make our jaw drop. You know what I'm saying? It's like, what? What? Why didn't I see that? That type of thing. So anyways, so born on Passover and sacrificed on Passover. Very interesting. Now, Jesus, because of Mary being pregnant and them only going through betrothment, he was probably mocked as a kid. Okay? He was known as the illegitimate son of Mary. All right? And in fact, in John chapter 8, okay, there's this interesting confrontation that might make sense now. John, remember that's where he's talking to the Pharisees a lot? In John 19 and in 44, I love his reply. In John 19, here's what the Pharisees say to him. So they were saying to him, where is your father? Because he was talking about his father. And they said, where is your father? You see what they're implying? Yeah, where is your father? You're a bastard. Your father's not around. Okay? Here's Jesus' reply in 44. He tells them who their father is. You are of your father, of the devil. And you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. And he's the father of lies. Isn't that interesting? Oh, you're asking about my father? I'll tell you about, and he was telling them about his father. Okay? And now he's going to tell them who their father is. Now, some people take that a little bit further than I think it should go. The seed of the serpent theory. Have you guys heard of that? Where Eve actually had sex with the devil. Have you never heard of that one? Seed of the serpent. And it says in Timothy, Paul writing to Timothy, I didn't look at the verse, it says Eve was deceived by Satan or whatever. But the word is actually seduce. And some people say she actually had sex, and that the Pharisees actually were the seed of the serpent, or actually in the physical lineage of the devil, which I think that's taking that one a little bit too far. In fact, in the Talmud, you know what it refers to Jesus as? As Ben Patera. Pantera. Ben Patera. They said that Mary had sex with a Roman soldier. Okay? And his name was Pantera. Now, of course, they're just making this up. So he's known as Ben Jesus or Yeshua Ben Pantera. He's the son of this Roman soldier they made up. So he went through a lot of ridicule. So no matter how bad you think it had, especially in that society, oh my gosh, that was a disgrace. So he went through a lot. Okay, now let's get to verse 7, really where I'm heading for. It says, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in cloths, or swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger because there's no room for them at the end. Now, we all have these different versions of this. I'm going to tell you what I think it is. Okay? Or from a lot of research over the years. I didn't just get this from like a quick YouTube or a quick reading of a book or something. This is after years of research. Not specifically on this, but as I went through all my stuff. For one thing, the swaddling clothes, you heard like, oh, that's what they did to all the babies, right? No, actually, there were strips of cloth. And supposedly you put them around the baby to keep them straight. Hello? Do you wrap your baby right when they're born so you keep them straight? And I'll tell you why that's not what it was, okay? Because it says this in Luke. The shepherds were told, this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths. If all the mothers did that, all the babies would be wrapped in clothes or swaddling clothes. How could that be a sign? In other words, they were so poor, they just had these strips of cloth. And you know what they used strips of cloth for? They used them as far as burial. In other words, this was a baby wrapped in a shroud. Now, get that? Because he was the only one who was ever born to die. That was the purpose he came. Yeah. In fact, I was at some church here recently where the worship leader got excited and she goes, Jesus saved the whole world just by being born. And I wish I had a buzzer. Oh, I have my little, doggone. My last time I could ever use it, I better bring it up. Yeah, I wish I had this because I would have gone. Okay? Because did he save the whole world just by being born? How did he save it? By dying. Now, of course, he had to be born first, but he didn't save anybody by being born. He saved it by his death. So it was a picture of why he came. He's wrapped in shroud, even as a baby. Now it says there's no room for them at the inn. Now what's that? Is some Motel 6 or something and they were busy? Something like that. Yeah. Okay, Mike, isn't that true? Okay. All right. All right. It's actually, okay, for one thing, you have Joseph, who's a direct descendant of King David. We just saw that in the kingly line, coming into town with a pregnant wife. And Mary actually had relatives nearby. It is unthinkable that there wouldn't be a house open to them. Even with the census, okay? Because people had to leave Bethlehem to go other places too. It was unthinkable during that time. So, the inn, if you get that Greek word, it appears in only 2 other places. And this is where I don't use the secular use of a word. I use what the biblical meaning is. In Mark 14:14 and Luke 22:11, both times that same Greek word is used for guest room, for the Last Supper or the Passover meal. So what they would do, if you look straight down at the house, usually they were single room dwellings, but what you would do is build on a little portion back here for guests, because hospitality was everything, right? Or if you look at the side of it, sometimes you had, well, you remember Elijah? He had a prophet's chamber up there where the widow built that for Elijah, right? So you would build it on top or to the side like that. So that's what that was. That's what that Greek word refers to, is the guest room. Okay, so it was basically saying the house they were staying at, there was no room in the guest room. So that was taken too. There's no room for them at the inn. So where's this stable? Okay, that's the next question. And by the way, in Luke chapter 10, the parable of the Good Samaritan, remember where he took the wounded person and took him to the inn? That's a whole different Greek word. That's a whole different Greek word. He didn't take him to someone's house. He didn't have, and so there was an innkeeper there and everything. So it's a whole different thing. Now, and it said laid him in a manger. So we have to determine where's the stable at. Here's how it works. Okay, at the front at the back house is that guest room, and at the front, either the doorway here or here, there was a little foyer kind of like. See, this was the main living area where you did your cooking, your sleeping, and everything. You would bring your animals in at night. You didn't want them stolen. Maybe it was too cold outside, whatever. And so right here, if you look at it on the sideways, here's the main living area. There was a drop of maybe a few feet, and here was that area. Or you had some timbers right here, a fence you would put up. Okay? That was the stable. Okay? The manger itself was either dug into the ground right here, or it was a trough that was hewn out of limestone or was made of wood. So they were actually in the house, right there. Okay? And that's where that took place. Now, we know this, it's even recorded in the Bible. 1 Samuel 28:24, the witch of Endor. Everybody remember that? King Saul, when he took all the meetings out of the country and God stopped talking to him, then he wanted to talk to a witch so you could talk to God, which, of course, when you get wacky like that, you start doing stupid things. Anyways, remember Samuel came up out of the ground? And then he says something really loving to Saul. He said, tomorrow at this time, you're going to be with me. Yeah, in other words, you're going to die. And so then at that time it says this, the woman had a fatted calf in the house, and she quickly slaughtered it, took flour, kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread from it. So what was she doing with a fatted calf in her house? It's right here. Because they had the stable in the front of the house. Okay. Jephthah, who had a great victory in the book of Judges. Remember? He said, Lord, if I win this victory, the first thing that comes out of my house, I'll sacrifice to you. You guys remember that one? Yeah. Now, obviously, what was he expecting to come out? Yeah. In the stable, right? It's not like it was fluffy and there were, fluffy would come out. It was like their livestock was in the house. Well, his daughter came out. Okay. Which was not good. And so in both those cases, we see that the stable was actually in the house. Okay. So just real quickly finishing up. Now we have the shepherds. Okay. The shepherds, and they were out in the fields. In the same region, there's some shepherds staying out in the fields, keeping watch over the flock by night. So we learned from that, number one, they're out at night. So a lot of people say it couldn't have been December. And we've already determined it's probably Passover anyways. Okay, so it wasn't December. Why did they choose December 25th? It's the viral equinox or whatever. It happens twice a year, which means the day and the night is exactly the same length. And to the occult, that's a big deal. December 21st to about January 6th. It could happen in that window of time, and then happens later in the year. And so it was a big pagan holiday, and for the Romans, it was Saturnalia, the celebration of the god Saturn. Okay? And so at that point, the church got jealous and said, you know what? This serving God's not for us. Why can't we have fun like the world has? And so they basically they created a holiday, the Christ Mass. That's what they called it. And that's where we get Christmas from, okay? And so if you go to Jeremiah 10, he says, don't follow the customs. He says, don't worship me like the nations do, the way of the nations. He says, don't follow the customs of the nations, because their way is a delusion, or that word's actually literally a vanity. It's emptiness. Okay? Now, shepherds in the first century, it went from being a shepherd, which King David was, right? And what does Psalm 23:1 say? Who's our shepherd? Yeah, Jehovah is our shepherd. It's actually Jehovah. So I wouldn't say it was a bad profession, right? King David was a shepherd, learned to lead his people that way. Jehovah is a shepherd. All right, as you go through the whole thing. But by the time of Jesus, they were poor. Rabbinic tradition had them as unclean, and they had a reputation for being thieves and scoundrels. And that brings me to 1 Corinthians 1:26-28. For consider your calling, brethren. There's not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things that are strong. And the base things of the world to despise, God has chosen the things that are not, that he may nullify the things that are, so that no man may boast before God. So who does it reveal the birth of his own precious son to? Shepherds. The scummy low class. The questionable people. The thieves. The unclean, right? They get the message that Jesus, he didn't tell the kings that. In fact, Herod, when the Magi came to Herod, which was a few years later, they weren't at the manger together. They asked him, well, where is he who was born king of the Jews? He didn't know.